So like I was saying, I was beating him in the face repeatedly, and he was begging me to stop.
It's
And
crazy you killed the guy, man.
all I could do was just laugh.
Oh, anyway. So
So
welcome
yeah,
to
I'm back. I'm back in New York.
New York.
I'm
Yeah,
back in New
beautiful
York.
New York.
But
Yeah, let's maybe talk about you got a lot of stuff going on right now. I thought we'd just open up and maybe you can let people know what's coming up for you because you're in the middle of a lot of cool stuff right now. So maybe we could just start out, let people know what you got going on, some dates on things and all that.
cool. Do a little bit of cold open straight into a some house cleaning
Yeah.
like that. Well, where to begin? The book is almost done. Uh, A Formless Fire, Rediscovering the Magical Traditions of the West, coming out on Tria Prima Press, likely July. It's going to be great. Truly, it's history, theory, and practice. So, I try to delineate the roadmap and then tell you about the territory. So that because they're different, they're not the same, right? Anybody who knows that the map is not the territory. It's an approximation of what you can expect, but there are nuances and there is a gnosis, an experiential component to exploring a territory as opposed to just looking at a map. So that's the difference between theory and practice. Now, the history is important because it's essentially the context. It lets you know where you're going, where you've come from, and where you are. Very important. So it's got all that. And then at the end, included as appendices, I've got certain practical uh, exercises, rituals, consecrations. And then I partnered with Daniel Wiseman from Secret Fire Apothecary, who Sky, you very,
One of my
uh,
favorite humans.
yeah, and you introduced me to him very graciously. So Daniel is great. He's a gentleman. He's extremely intelligent and eloquent, a fantastic alchemist. And he and I put together basically a, uh, a recipe for a spagyric tincture. So there's a lot of cool stuff, and there's a lot of ritual component stuff that I'm dyed in the wool with that stuff. For yeah, I've dabbled in alchemy, because you kind of have to be well rounded. And it's something I hope to pursue further. But I would say first and foremost, I'm a theurgist. I'm a ritual magician. So uh there's some of that for everybody. Now, June 8th and 9th, I'm hosting, uh, along with Asheville Masonic Temple, I'm hosting the first ever 2024, right? That's this year, Southeastern Masonic Symposium. And again, that's going to be a day and a half of lectures, presentations, socializing, all that fun stuff. Myself, most worshipful past Grand Master Sean Bradshaw of the state of North Carolina, worshipful brother Ben Wallace, who was the creator of the Middle Chamber program for Masonic education that has been adopted now, and we've got brother John Gilbert coming from Kentucky. His recent retranslation of the Emerald Tablet and his book coming out with Laughing Lion this year called "Not as Above, Not as Below." How we got the Emerald Tablet wrong. He'll be there giving a talk on it. Um, Obviously, Jamie Paul Lamb is coming to give a presentation on the astrological symbolism of Freemasonry, and I'm going to be doing a talk. There is a Masonic component and a non-Masonic component. These tracks will be running in tandem. Non-Masons will be able to access the non-Masonic Zoom. Masons will be able to access the Masonic Zoom with proof of their membership to the fraternity. It's $90 to be there in person, and it's $40 to be there on Zoom. So I think this is a high value event, especially as Masonic conferences go. Brother Clint Green is always going to is also going to be speaking. I mean, we really just got fantastic presenters. It's the theme is really Masonic history and Masonic esotericism. Everyone involved, to one degree or another, is a serious practitioner. Um, yeah, so that's June 8th and 9th. Sky, maybe we can include a link to where you can buy the ticket online and preview the event itineraries. After that, July, I'm going to be speaking at EnokiaCon that Frater RC is putting on in Vancouver. Now, we're not, he had some issues, and he and he's really somebody very, very special to me right now. We met and we've spoken a few times and we just hit it off. And I think we have great conversations and great chemistry. And I really feel for him. He just underwent a personal tragedy, a fan tragedy, very unfortunate freak accident. And so he's been grieving from that. And it happened in the middle of the EnokiaCon sort of promotional preparation. So we're trying to get back on track and see if we can make this an in-person event. That's definitely what he wanted to do. I'm not sure as of right now. We might be online, we might be in person, but it's still happening. August, I'm going to be speaking at the Vermont Golden Dawn Conference headed by Kirk White, a great friend, great frater, a serious Golden Dawn adept, and big name in Rosicrucian Freemasonry in the Northeast. He's putting on his annual Golden Dawn Conference. Day 1 is open to the public. Day 2 is only the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the Cicero lineage. I'm going to be the speaker along with Chick and Tabitha. So that's going to be excellent. Always love to see them. September, I'm speaking at the Esotericism and Freemasonry Conference that Brother Troy Sprue puts on in Seattle, Washington. That's going to be a fantastic event. I'm the keynote speaker, so I'll be speaking both days. Last but certainly not least, in October, we have the new Hermopolis International Conference, which is probably about as an historic event as it is a conference. I mean, this is world history in the making. We've got amazing keynote speakers, Walter Hanegraaff, Dr. Gregory Shaw, Dr. Shannon Grimes, Roxana Dumitrakis, Mark Vernon, Charles Stang, really unbelievable. Dr. Mervat Nasser, the founder of the New Hermopolis Eco Village, is going to be there. It's going to take place October 24th to the 27th. We're going to be live in person at the New Hermopolis Eco Village and Cultural Heritage Site. Now, the place is small and it's extremely remote. It's about 2 or 3 hours in the middle of the desert, just outside the ruins of Hermopolis Magna, the ancient city of Hermes. So we're going to be in the desert there. And since space is limited, it's not an in-person attendee sort of thing, but we are going to be broadcasting or streaming the event's proceedings a few weekends afterwards. There will also be presenters there, such as myself, Adina Bezarita, practitioners. I mean, we're going to be practitioner presenters. Adina Bezarita is going to speak. Jamie Paul Lamb's going to speak. Soledad Davies is going to speak. Danny Newman. And it's going to be fantastic. We're also running an online practitioner presentation course that will be the weekend of the conference. You can sign up again. We'll put links to this. You can sign up on our Patreon and either get a single lecture pass. You can either get that or a 1-day pass or a 3-day pass, and you'll be able to see all the presentations that happen on that day and the online track, which is happening in cooperation with the Arcanum channel. And we also there have incredible online presenters. So it's really going to be fantastic. Marlena Seven Bremner is doing a video for that. And we've just got tons. If I start going down the list, we'll be talking about this shit for another 10 minutes. So keep pace with that, because that is something that should be on your radar, whether you're a scholar or a practitioner or both. The purpose of it is to gather scholars, serious and serious practitioners at the highest level of their game, get them together in the desert, have them give presentations to each other, and then on the final night of presentations, that is the 26th, we're having a large post-dinner symposium where everyone takes part in a gigantic conversation. And it's going to be very almost reality TV kind of filmed. We're going to do it. You're going to be a fly on the wall of that historic conversation. And then finally, the last day on the 27th, we'll all be going together to explore the ruins of Hermopolis Magna. So far, that's what we got lined up. There's a bunch of other little shit. Just go to ikebaker.com. and you will be able to see everything down to the minutest detail of what we've got going. And there's a second book that's coming out next year. I don't want to say too much about it, but I do want to say that Sky did the illustrations, and that's going to be a massive release, definitely. The Tria Prima one is too, but they're different. The Tria Prima one is history, theory, practice. Second book is essentially a system, a workable system that I've been creating over the course of a decade. So it's got history and theory in it, but primarily practice. And this is something that's almost completely new. So that's big. Sky, thanks for helping me with that.
Thanks for allowing me to help you with that. I can't wait. Both of those books side by side are going to be massive, and it's just something that I can't wait to have access to personally because it encompasses so much. The Formless Fire one's a pretty heavy batch of pages. What is it, like 800 or
No. It's after formatting, that kind of changes things. After formatting, we're at about 550, around there, ballpark.
550? Well, for somebody that reads as slow as I do, it's a lot. So
Feels
I'm
like
gonna,
it's 550 pages, reads like 800.
yeah. Sweet. Well, that's amazing. I can't wait for all of that. I know that I'll be attending the Zoom for the symposium, and I'm really looking forward to it. I would love to be there in person, but I don't think I'm going to be able to make it out. But
Understand.
fortunately, it's online, so that's awesome. Um, all right. So wanted to bring up some interesting subjects.
Yeah. What are we
We
talking about?
so we had, brief little discussion last time I came out, hung out with you, kind of stirred up some of these thoughts, questions, things I would like to put out there and let people listen to your take on. Um, Start out with spiritualizing matter. Um, what does it mean to spiritualize matter?
Well, I think the thing that most people get wrong is that they think that they're going to arrive at something that is going to divinize them. Um, and they're going to arrive at some sort of secret. They're going to come into possession of some sort of knowledge, typically intellectual. At least that's kind of how it starts out, you know? And they're going to be um, enlightened by some old tome, um, and that is going to sort of save them, clear up their problems, or give them the power to uh, transform their life in some way that is quick and drastic. And that is, in my experience, operating under false pretenses. Now, sure, can you participate in Goetia and Solomonic stuff and come across insane amounts of knowledge in a very short period of time? Can you change your life radically, materially? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, that's not enlightenment. That's not what it's all about. That doesn't really spiritualize matter very much. You're just using machinery, you're using mechanics that are little suspected by people and have been called occult for at least, 300-400 years. Occult meaning unseen, not observable with the senses. At least the mechanics of are not observable. Their outcomes are very clearly observable most of the time. That's not technically the spiritualization of matter. Really, the spiritualization of matter, you got to understand nothing is going to divinize you. The consciousness that you bring to it, the state of awareness that you bring to anything or that you gradually cultivate, that divinizes things. That is the state of the ever rarefying and evolving state of spirituality is changing your consciousness. It's why we do the things we do, ritual and all the theurgic sort of stuff, and particularly initiatic stuff. That type of stuff is theurgic and it is initiatic. That's kind of the whole point of the 500 some odd pages of A Formless Fire, is to demonstrate that what we understand to be the occult and the occult arts and sciences and things like this come to us primarily from the initiatic, theurgic lineages of antiquity. There's other stuff, but it's kind of not the telos. It's not the purpose of the system of initiatic transmission. So why? Why is that? Well, because typically a lot of these things have karmic consequences which further enmesh the person in the material. There are further links, there's further ties, there's further bondage to the material realm. Doesn't matter if you're using energy or thoughts or calling upon spirits to have things happen for you. You're kind of just opting out of doing things, getting good at mastering the laws of Malkuth of Asaya, right? You want it, like, if I just want to make more money, I'm just going to do more work. Sure, I want it to be work that other people find of high value. I want it to be very good work, and I want it to be work that I enjoy and am good at. But I'd rather do the work myself than kind of bypass that lesson or that skill, bypass that mastery by kind of having it done for me underneath the laws of Malkuth and not striving by my own efforts. A lot of people would say, well, I'm using the laws, but I'm using laws that work faster and that are more effective. Sure, but at the end of the day, there's a reason why occultists call Malkuth of Asaya the Gate of Tears. It's because the real lesson here is learning to bear your suffering, so that you can ultimately transcend this realm and live for the next world. And you're not really doing that unless you're suffering and learning to bear your suffering and giving of yourself to other people. And that comes with toiling by your own efforts, right? By the sweat of your brow will you eat bread, as it says in the Old Testament. So you're not really learning those material lessons. You're bypassing them. It's like a cheat code. You didn't get good at the game. And what that does is it further commits you. It further cements your desire, really, and your connection to the karmic edifice that goes into the material plane, rather than transcending it. So if you're enmeshed here with it and you're participating in the karma without really an experience of the transcendent, you're not spiritualizing matter. You can only spiritualize matter when you have an experience of the transcendent, that many people call gnosis. That really, the experience itself is the culmination of gnosis. Gnosis is the thing that you sort of finally pass the threshold and have an understanding of what's going on, a deep knowledge. I was reading the Phaedrus today, and in the Phaedrus, or no, I'm sorry, the Phaedo. Like I said, I've said it before, I always mix those two up, but it's Platonic dialogue. It's the third dialogue in the succession of the Iamblichian curriculum. And in it, Socrates says that the soul, until philosophy receives her, experiences life as if behind the bars of a prison. So it's really philosophy liberates that whole entombing of the soul. That's the first step towards the spiritualization of the material, is to live the philosophical life and die the philosophic death. And then from there, you can really begin to make your ascent towards the theurgic mystery rites, which are the practical side of the divination of the self. You are the material, and really you enact that in and of yourself. You don't go around with some fucking wand going boop, and then like some sort of weird cascade that happens, and all the what was black and white is now bright and vivid color. It's not really how it happens. It's a very intimate, private, personal, interior process. And then from there, really, your being radiates that spiritual change. And even in Chinese medicine, I'm studying Chinese medicine, they say at the highest levels of the adept practitioner of classical change, their mere presence is the healing. Talking about that kind of thing, but it has to happen. It's an interior thing that happens first, and a lot of it has to do with, unfortunately, transcending worldly wisdom. It's very hard to do that unless you've had direct experience of the transcendent, and then you realize that, oh, all of this stuff is kind of inverted. It's all an inversion. What's upside down, or what's right side up here is upside down there, on the other side of that, of the third veil. So that's I guess that would be like a pretty cursory introduction to the idea of spiritualizing the material.
What is something in terms of being in contact with different forms of consciousness or different entities, in terms of natural and unnatural, or natural and supernatural? Say we have something like a nature spirit or an elemental, undines, sylphs, gnomes, salamanders, etc. Are these considered natural beings since they're nature spirits, or are they supernatural?
I think supernatural is a term used to describe anything that has a manifestation that isn't directly cognizably material by use of the five senses. So while they are associated with nature and they act as a sort of animating intelligence or different phases of the ontological chain of a particular thing, I think most people who use the term supernatural would refer to these things as supernatural to one degree or another. So, because they are spiritual, that's really what they are. The best term for them is that they're a rock is not spiritual. A geode is not, the physicality of the geode is not, while it is miraculous and beautiful, it is not necessarily spiritual. It's physical material. It has an indwelling geometry that is typically shaped by, what the Greeks would have called pneumatic noesis, the spiritual intelligence. But the matter in and of itself is not necessarily spiritual. Now, we conceive of certain laws that apply to, say, something like a geode, very earthy, the way it grows, the way it fractalizes, or the way that the environment in which it can sort of, right, because we say grows because, as we know from the tradition of alchemy, there are seeds of metals and things like this, and it's believed that these take on this kind of this life and this formation, over imperceptibly, long and slow periods of time, large periods of time. So, to interact, let's say, with a gnome is really to engage on the astral with the, I would say, animating intelligence. It becomes embodied because of our available imagery, because of the folk traditions surrounding these things. But ultimately, it's an energy that has a job to do, and it really only does the job that it is tasked with doing, that it has been developed to do. It can't really do much else. There are some traditions that say, oh, you can make a pact with nature spirits and things for you.
Hold on one second. I think
Exchange
you're cutting out.
them being near you will kind of, they're that compact for. Um, Other than that, I mean, I think supernatural versus natural when we're talking about spiritual entities is fairly arbitrary, and it's not really indicative of what's happening. I think it's somewhat of a misnomer, and it's an easy one. It's an easy trap to fall into because it's popular, because it's really used by many people who are at the outer gate of occultism, and we all got to pass through that outer gate, and so you pick up the lingo of like the freshmen, the neophytes, and it's like, oh yeah, and you start talking based off of what they're saying at the outer gate. When you get to the inner gate, you're talking to people like, yeah, this is the lingo, right? And they're looking at you like, no, son, no, like, and I imagine that just continues to happen as you pass through, the several stages of initiation and spiritual development. But ultimately, you're interacting with the spiritual ontological chain of these things at a different level. So you're really interacting with their intelligences, which have a species of autonomy, and the reason why we conceive of them as certain taking certain forms is because this is the available collective imagery that is amenable to their nature.
Yeah. Yeah, because I was thinking of like what was considered, everybody refers to nature or what's considered of the natural world, and the term nature, everybody uses it for so many things. And so it was just making me think of a lot of these questions. So like an archangel, for example, like that definitely wouldn't be of the natural world, would it? Because it's like a higher spiritual realm.
Well, if we're talking about, well, now I can kind of see more of what you're saying. This is along the lines of Agrippa. He has his book on natural magic, which deals with the lower spirits, the lower intelligences. And then you've got the archangels would be more celestial in nature, or really even closer to the noetic realm, the realm, the divine mind, the empyrean. They'd be sort of direct emissaries of that realm, but operating in the celestial. But the thing is, it's we have to talk about these things through symbolic narratives so that we come to understand their place and purpose and position in the hierarchy of ordered existence. But ultimately, again, you're acting an archangel. I'll put it this way, right? I've talked about this before. If you have, right, like the ontological chain descending down. So let's say my elbow is kind of like the archetype, the idea in the Briatic realm that has been sent down from the nous, the capital M mind of God, comes through the Briatic realm and creates an idea there, and it's a definite form. And so then it descends downward into its final material trajectory, into its final material basis. So we go down the four worlds from Atzilut, Bria, Yetzirah, and then Asaya, where the thing is made. And it descends downward like this, right? And let's say my fist here, this is the whatever it is, the ruby. Well, as you go uh further up the ontological hierarchy, intelligences get more rarefied, they get stronger, and they become more abstract. They get closer, they get closer to the divine noetic state. If I think that's a good way to put it, getting closer to the divine noetic state as you go up the ontological hierarchy. And so you're interfacing with different parts of that ontological hierarchy. Now, the symbolic narrative that we use, I wouldn't say necessarily it's completely arbitrary, but I would say it helps one wrap their mind around where they are on that ontological hierarchy, is to divide them into natural, celestial, or really what's better, elemental, celestial, and then divine noetic. Because the thing is, we don't call the nature spirits, we don't call them the natural spirits. We call them the elementals. These are elemental spirits. So that's that I think really brings clarity to the issue that you're talking about.
Okay.
To me, to me, if you're acting, I mean, if you're interfacing with the intelligence or the spirit of something, you're no longer acting with its matter. You're kind of, you're, again, we talked about it just earlier. You're circumventing the natural law to go and going to speak with the thing that's generating that natural law.
Mm.
Um, so yeah. So I mean, it's all, but again, it's all really semantic and it's all pretty hairy because people can say, well, okay, how is the thing that generates a natural law unnatural? That's not really what we're talking about. To clarify, we're talking about what part of the ontological chain you're dealing with and you're interfacing with. Where on that chain are you kind of joining and then beginning to have some sort of effect?
Yeah. Yeah. So when we think of things natural or unnatural and the relationship that we as humans have with natural or unnatural things, I guess it isn't really necessarily that one's always by default preferable or more beneficial to engage with, right? Because we could say to ourselves, I want to live a more natural life. And what we could mean by that is we want to avoid like synthetic compounds or chemicals or avoid cities and technology, maybe move out in the forest, near a river, have some clean air, and we would call that a natural life. But it's not really so much about being immersed in nature, if we're using that definition in and of itself. It's more like what is the things that are bringing us a more healthy, harmonious expression. Because, like, if we went all in on that idea of what our idea of moving out into nature and living a natural life with was, we could be maybe exposing ourselves to too much sun for too long and we can get sunburn, or we could hunt a bear and not cook the meat properly and get a parasite. We could eat the wrong natural plant and it poisons us.
Yeah. Well,
All
I
these are
mean,
natural things, but they have negative results. So it's not, you know what I mean?
well, yeah, because and then another thing is that like, yeah, you move out to the country because you've kind of bought this bullshit about, how people are shit and animals are better and all this stuff. And really it's, what the thing that you're agreeing with is the reflection of yourself. Typically you probably fucking hate yourself if you hate people, to one degree or another. We're social animals. I think one of the most spiritual ideas is the fact that we're all fragments of a single consciousness. So how are you going to rectify that? What kind of bullshit mental gymnastics are going to you use, are you going to use to be able to say, well, I'm just clearing out and doing this thing. And a lot of times, in times of trouble, in times of political strife, the Taoist masters used to say, steer clear of the cities and head up into the mountains. That was to avoid becoming mired in the inevitable persecution of religious communities or spiritual communities or philosophical communities. Ultimately, you know, true adepthood comes in understanding that we are a community, we are one body, and so if you choose to move away from that, I mean, I could sort of understand how you would want to do that for a little while to sort of incubate and have a short hermitage while you kind of recoagulate, after dissecting yourself through a spiritual alchemical initiatic process. But ultimately, you got to come back to civilization and help heal. I mean, that's the Rosicrucian adage, right? They have a few things that they're tasked with doing, and two of them are to wear the clothes of the country in which they live, meaning fit in, fit in. You're not special, fit in. And then also to when asked what they do for a profession, as you just say, to heal the sick, and that gratis, meaning for free. So these people that want to live a more natural life, it's kind of an abomination to be away from people.
Yeah. So we would have to mitigate the dangers of nature just the same as we would have to mitigate our exposure to things we would call unnatural, like computer screens or social media or Doritos or all that shit. But isn't technology and all of these sort of things just more dense expressions of nature's material inclination in Malkuth of Asaya? Aren't these things, are these unnatural just more complex variations of natural things, and like the ultimate truth of what it is? Or you know what I mean? It's almost like
I
the
mean,
term is like irrelevant.
a pen is technology. This pipe is technology.
Right.
And the main thing, right? The root of the word technology comes from the Greek techne, and it just means craft. And the thing is, you can only have a craft if you're a human being. Yeah, of course, bees make honey, but that's amenable to their nature. The human influence on things, uh, you know, animate and inert, has a way of transforming them. And I think what they get transformed into has a lot to say about the state of mind that people are in. Um, I think of technology, particularly of like social media and the stuff that we're talking on now. I view it as an abomination of nature. But at the same, because we our current mindset is abominable. When we created these devices, people say, "Oh, well, they connect people." No, they don't. Because talking to somebody on a fucking computer screen is not connecting me with them, not in a human way. It's like, yeah, I can keep in touch with you very superficially, and I can also fucking avoid you, right? People don't call anymore if they're going to be late. People don't call if they're not going to show up. People don't feel any kind of onus to keep their promises. They'll make something up and hide behind the fucking wall of text messaging. Nobody bears any personal accountability or responsibility anymore. Um, we just don't treat each other like human beings. But it's normalized. So it's, people can get away with it, and people will do whatever they can get away with. Um, so yeah, I think I would not say a computer is like, an expression of nature. Um, I would say on some levels, a computer is an expression of something higher. Let's say communication. Let's also say the way a computer works kind of mirrors the holographic nature of incarnation to a certain degree. There's a lot of really interesting ways in which a computer, hardware, software, pixels, all that stuff relates to um, the format of creation, and the way at the highest levels actual creation is sort of put together in a very granular way. And I think that comes from, as Plato might have said, anamnesis, a remembering of things, sort of archetypal, that our soul um, is conversant with, or has some kind of experience of before or in between incarnations. And we carry these things in, and they kind of are the underlying inspirations. I think some of this stuff is, I guess another way to put it is received. We receive certain inspirations. That's certainly the way the ancient Greeks would have conceptualized it, with the musai, right? The muses.
Mm.
Um, but ultimately it's all about intent, you know. Nothing is inherently bad in and of itself. I mean, even ancient doctors knew the difference between medicine and poison is the dose. So it's all about what state of mind is hewing it, is creating it, and then what state of mind it's being used in. So I think that's the key thing. I just think that we should get back to, the best thing that you can do is go back to at least being able to understand the way human beings perceived reality, understood things, processed them, and then communicated and interacted with each other before, like, maybe 700 CE. Find that and then live in the modern day. You don't have to cosplay and and go build a fucking cob home in the middle of the woods and eat out of, pottery. You don't have to do that. That's extreme. But you can inform your daily living if you understand what, the way that human consciousness has interacted with its surrounding and each other for millennia. This is what we were doing before the current bullshit. And so you'll be able to tell, like, okay, this is fine. And okay, when you cross that line, you'll be able to say, okay, this is fucking unnecessary. And that's one of the biggest problems we have with postmodernism, the mass confusion that comes from people not understanding their reality. We have no fucking context, and we have the worst cultural, spiritual amnesia. We don't even remember what the fuck happened a couple of months ago.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think I bring this up because it's almost like some people worship nature. So, and to me, spiritual development and what's good for us, it's not really about what's natural versus what's unnatural because, like, the spiritual spark that animates us is not of the natural world. It's just coded in Hyle, allowing us to engage in the natural experience. So it's really everything is more about the balance of forces and calibration of energies, regardless of whether they're natural or unnatural, and how we utilize our will to either block out or allow in different forces or energies that bring us into harmony with our most exalted expression or the good of things. Would
Yeah.
you say that's like a fair assessment?
Yeah, I would say that there's definitely something to that. I would say that a very succinct way of putting it, or maybe not succinct, but I would say that you do have to put it this way, right? The Platonic demiurge, let's talk about him. Or we could just talk about the Gnostic demiurge. Either way, the materials the demiurgic entity uses to create the universe are spiritual. They're based on divine principles, but they're not from the divine, and therefore they cannot be everlasting. Only the everlasting can make something that lasts forever. And I mean, truly, not even, right? Because if the absolute had to create something, well, that means that it hasn't been around forever. So only the absolute can be absolute. But the thing is, the demiurge is conceived of as you making creation from the divine forms in the noetic realm. Plato might call the realm of forms or the realm of ideas. He uses those forms because they are perfect, but he can't make something perfect because it can never be eternal and everlasting. But that does mean that there are seeds of beauty to the order of the material universe. Now, as an initiate, your first task is to remodel your microcosm so that it is based more on the proportions of the divine in the material. So there is a segment of the initiatic transformation that requires you to conform yourself to higher nature. But in order to conform yourself to that, you need to be able to perceive it in the first place, right? You can't, if I want to rearrange the interior of my living room to look like I don't know, a famous actor or actress's room. Well, I have to first see and know what that room is. Otherwise, I'm just guessing. Uh, and a lot of people are so fucking certain that they know what that room looks like. And those are usually neo-pagans.
Hmm.
Neo-pagans are usually the people they just look at nature. They don't look at the higher, the divine aspects of it, the order. They don't want to see order most of the time because they're more interested in countercultural rebellion, and giving themselves a sense of specialness. Because, in all fairness, these people came from most of them come from a situation where they're on the fringes. They're not accepted. They're not fucking special. They're not cool. So they come to these organizations to feel like they have something figured out and that they are set apart. Um, and it's us against the world, right? There's that unnatural bifurcation, of the social hiving and things like that. So, but from there, ultimately, the theurgic ascent. Okay, you've mastered a certain level of ordering yourself, um, on a divine pattern, but at the same time, everything that's created here has a lifespan, is subject to corruption, and ultimately, when pursued for its own ends, will change the soul. Now, I've talked about this from the Platinian perspective. When we talk about the Enneads, talk about Plotinus conceiving of the three hypostases and how the third hypostasis, soul or psyche, um, exteriorizes the forms that the divine nous, the second hypostasis, sort of delineates. And so it objectifies these things and then desires them. So soul's main thing is desire, observation and desire. And so it descends, it dives into matter, the realm of form, as if chasing these things. And Plotinus says, again, highly in and of itself is not evil, but when pursued for its own ends, the soul gets stuck, as in like a
Mm.
sticky tar. Now, again, reading the Phaedo today, it comes straight out of Plato, where he talks about the idea of the soul is fastened by hooks or pins, kind of, as an analogy to the body. And our struggle is higher consciousness, the higher mental faculties, the temporal faculties, ones that we have a very hard time explaining even in modern psychology, and material inclination or desire bound mind, necessity bound mind. Um, but Plato says that when the soul obeys, chooses to obey the promptings, to sort of abdicate its rulership, and just follow blindly somewhat the promptings of the body, the soul begins to become like the body and begins to believe in the illusions of the body and not to become sort of estranged from its own nature. And then it develops the tastes and the desires of the body. And so once it's released from the body by death, it just sinks back down into another one. It has none of its own upward momentum to resist reincarnation. And that's essentially, I mean, that is the myth of Hades and Persephone. She being abducted by picking up the narcissus flower, right? The soul diving down,
Mhm.
but then being abducted because it's like, holy shit, what did I get myself into? I'm sort of stuck here now. And the reason why she keeps coming, she has to come back. Despite Zeus's divine decree via Hermes, she has to be released back to the upper world. She eats a pomegranate seed while she's down there that was offered to her by Hades. And because of that act, she has to keep coming. That doesn't make any fucking sense. But it makes sense if you understand that she, like Eve, is eating the fruit of material incarnation. And once having tasted that fruit, will continually come back.
Mm. Yeah, I
So this
think.
this is what we're trying to escape, right? It's not about let's be one with nature and let's put let's wear laurel in our fucking hair. You
Yeah.
know, it's not about worship of Pan. It's not about who's a fucking devotee of Demeter. That's not what this is. This is all side quest cosplay bullshit. At the end of the day, this is the fucking tradition. Now you're either ready to do it or you're not, but don't lie to yourself because you can't lie to people who are actually doing it. We see right fucking through you like a greasy piece of paper.
Yeah. So I like, yeah, matter isn't evil in and of itself, you said. It's the pursuit of matter for its own ends. I think that's
Well,
like
yeah,
a really important.
Plotinus said that. I can't take credit for that.
Yeah. But I think it's important to highlight because I don't know, it's good. And then so like in terms of making choices to arrive at what's good for humans, so like good for humanity, so good isn't necessarily universal, right? Because isn't the good of humanity, doesn't it differ from the good of maybe the angelic realm? Um, or how would you describe good in relation to like the different forms of consciousness, like humanity versus angels or things like this?
Again, yeah, it depends on what segment of the ontological chain are you prioritizing? That's really what the question boils down to. What am I prioritizing? Um, you know, some people say to stay alive is good. Some other people say no, it's not. One of the most famous stories about the Buddha is the way he died. He was accidentally, the tale goes is that he was accidentally poisoned by somebody who was cooking for him in a, public house that served food. And the person who now poisoned him runs out and profusely apologizes. And the Buddha said, "Why would you apologize? You've done me, a blessing. You're the one who freed me. You're freeing me from my material coil, ultimately a mercy." So I think that that's really potent, is that what phase of the ontological chain of being are you prioritizing? Now, if you just, the interesting thing about Buddha is that, Siddhartha Gautama, he didn't bypass anything. In other words, he didn't kill himself. He knew that that wasn't the way. That's not the lesson. You're taking the easy way out. But he was relieved when he did die, especially after, becoming enlightened. So I would say that there is a universal good. And I think that all beings can tap into it. The issue is that you need to obtain a certain perspective that is transcendent of the lower parts of that ontological hierarchy, in order to understand, first of all, that you are too small a cog and too large a fucking machine in your material manifestation to understand what definitively good is to an infinite mind, to an infinite being. You have no fucking clue. So because we have a lot of tropes, we have a lot of fucking, we have a lot of bullshit projections of what a spiritual quote unquote person is supposed to look like, and how they're supposed to behave and what they're supposed to do. And ultimately, it's another form of control. It's just another form of control to neutralize you. And so that you sit there and you become fucking passive, and that the powers that be on this earth, right, the ones that Paul called spiritual wickedness in high places, get to have the fucking run of the house, and you sit there and do nothing, and you're not evolving, because Malkuth Messiah is based on struggle, strife, striving. It's not based on checking out. The theurgic ascent requires that you use materiality as rungs on a ladder to get the fuck out, or at least really get your head, as the theurgist would have said, to have your head ascend into the noetic realm. That's the highest. That's the only part of the human that can pass into the noetic, which is a way of symbolically saying only the mind can travel there. Right? Proclus said it. Mortals who understand the body alone cannot attain the heights. Only those lightly armed can attain the summit. So, the head, the mind delves into the noetic realm, has the Gnostic experience, has maybe henosis, the experience of henosis, one with the oneness with deity, absorption. But ultimately, like, you don't turn into fucking unicorn fart dust and just ascend into the stratosphere. No, you open your eyes and you're back in your fucking material body. Now, your consciousness is more aware. It's probably broader. You might even have certain things now that you can do or think of, or talents that you might not have even had before that now are burgeoning and things like that. But ultimately, that is the spiritualization of nature. It's like drawing fresh water from a deep, deep well. Is really what it is. And it has a cleansing, a purificatory effect on your sphere of sensation, which then has ripples and consequences in the material realm, because that's how the material realm is structured. It's based off of karma, cause and effect. But it's you can't check out. That's not the way. I mean, Westcott put it in the Flying Rolls this way. He said, the man who, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but he basically says the person who is a slave to their lower self will practice vice in a forest. So in other words, he was a big advocate of suffering what he called the more severe discipline and obtaining a greater reward by, living the spiritual life in a city or in a community. He was very, very strong on that. That's one of the reasons why the Golden Dawn is the way it is. It's structured the way it is. They don't go into seclusion. They don't go into hermitage. They don't walk away from the world. They work on themselves, and then they work within the world. And that is theurgy. You don't transcend and stay, you transcend and come back down and then bring everything back up by what you now understand and your actions in your life.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we have no clue what good is, how do we know what direction to go? Like, I feel like theurgy, it seems like a clue to me, but I mean, I don't know. Like, how do you, how do you direct and orient yourself if you don't know, if nobody knows what good is, like you say?
Well, it's not that nobody knows what good is, it's that nobody knows what definitively what good is to an infinite mind.
Mm,
There's a big difference. There's a
okay.
big difference. Now, Plato, right? Because the thing is, we talk about certain things. We talk about this is where the language gets hairy, and why having this context of Platonism, Neoplatonism, Hermetism, and Gnosticism. That's the trajectory of the tradition. That's the tradition in its fullness. Platonism, Neoplatonism, Hermetism, Gnosticism. They all share the common language, the common system. All of it is the same thing in slightly different cultural garb. But Plato talks about the demiurge and the timaeus. Really, it's more of a Pythagorean idea, and he talks about it as a benevolent creator. But that's not the one of Plotinus. That's not the the infinite diffuse absolute consciousness that has to be referred to apophatically. If we had to refer to the demiurge apophatically, we wouldn't be able to call it the demiurge. We wouldn't be able to say it did anything or created anything. It wouldn't be, it would have no characteristics. So the question is, what is good to the demiurge and demiurgic stuff? And then, but what is really, good to the infinite? And I think that's theurgy is not necessarily doing what's good, right? I mean, so that's also in the flying roles.
Mm,
Frater Levavi Oculus or Percy Bullock, he writes in one of the flying roles, you did not enter into this order to become good.
mm,
That's not what it is. Okay. Uh, you know, recently somebody I know took the Zalata ritual, right? And in the
mhm,
Zalata ritual, you enter the path of evil and you say, you can't go this way. And then you enter the path of good. And it says,
okay.
you can't go this way.
Yeah.
So we're not doing something that's good. We're doing something that helps us know.
Okay.
That's the
So,
whole fucking thing is help us know. The spiritualization of the material isn't necessarily good. It's just it's a product of gnosis. The whole system is just a product of gnosis. And why do we pursue it? Personally, I think that you need faith. I would take faith over goodness any day of the week. And people would say that, oh, that's a pretty fundamentalist view. And those fucking people are obviously dyed in the wool postmodernists, have
mhm.
been completely saturated with the fucking brine of postmodern life that lies to you, fills your head full of bullshit, and then you walk around confused, angry, and not understanding what's going on around you, and you have no idea why. You know, um,
Does getting into contact with your higher divine genius, does it kind of bring you into resonance with more of the um the good of all, or like is it
no,
a closer? No?
not at all. Not even close.
Okay.
It brings you to with a confrontation and an understanding with your personal telos, your personal purpose for existence, what it is you are here to do, and that is different for everybody. And it's different from the fucking things that you're expecting because of all the projections and all of the images and the archetypes that have been shoved down our throats and pushed in our faces by TV and movies and all that sort of fiction that borrows from this stuff because it's really interesting and it's really far out to most average people who go to work and I don't know what but ultimately it's not about putting you in touch with the greater good. I mean, at that point, who gives a fuck about the greater good? It's you have the greater good is every person getting in touch with their purpose, their telos, and sitting down, shutting up, and having a nice tall glass of act right. That's really it. Is you have to get yourself in alignment with, and it's hard because people new to this coming into it cannot differentiate between the pop sense of the word good and order or telos, and the whole thing is that word, so many of the words that we use to discuss this stuff philosophically, epistemologically, spiritually, they mean something, they bear a slightly different shade of meaning for every fucking mind that uses them. So it's like you're saying good and I'm saying no, but it's like I don't have a definite idea of what that word means in its entirety to you. It could mean something different in different situations. And I think that might have been what you were asking earlier. But ultimately, you got to get it out. And I think most Golden Dawn adepts would tell you that you got to get good out of your head. For all intents and purposes, there you take the straight and narrow path that turns neither to the left or neither to the right, and you work your ass upward. The whole goal is to get in touch with the higher divine genius, and then the higher divine genius tells you what is good, and that's
Okay.
it. That's how it works. There's no way the person can do it. That's why
And
we have this people rioting in the streets in the name of good and really burning down, just innocent fucking local shopkeepers trying to make a buck. And that's good. That's not good. That's obsession with this idea of good, and even wearing good as a mask, really to conceal what you just the inner anger, the inner fire and anguish that you've carried around that you really want to just fucking, project onto somebody. So good is a hairy word.
yeah. And so if the higher divine genius is bringing us into contact with what it is we are here to do or our purpose, is that going to be something that's determined based off of our astral garments as imparted by the like heptagram of the demiurge, or is this something where we're transcending those influences and like connecting with what it is we are here to do? How does
That's a good
that?
question. There's a good question. So essentially, yes. But the thing is that experience is only the beginning of what we would call the transcendence of fate. Um, you know, um, it's a lifelong process, at least, if not lifetimes, long process of gradual clarity, understanding, unfoldment, revelation, personal gnosis, and abeyance. Setting the personal will in abeyance, obeying the promptings of the higher, which, depending on how strong the connection is, I mean, you never really know the full picture. It's very rare you get the full picture. Most people would balk. They'd be terrified at the full picture. They wouldn't know what to do with it. So, that's like living every day of your life knowing and how you're going to die. It's you just you couldn't live, most people couldn't live with that kind of foresight, but the thing that I say a lot, if you rewind the tape and I say follow the promptings. Now Socrates puts it in an interesting way. He said that his daimon never told him he should do anything, but told him what not to do, which is very interesting. It can manifest in that way. But I would say like a huge way to know that you are sort of in touch with that power. One of them is very, very vivid and quasi, semi-frightening synchronicity. And then another one is the awakening of things like intuition and foreknowledge and things like that. And bearing in mind that instinct is not synonymous with intuition. Instinct is much more animal, the way a mother has an instinct to feed and protect your children. But intuition is foreknowledge of something that you could not have obtained in any reasonable, visible or logically discernible way. So two very different things, but easily confused. But those are ways when those things begin happening and awakening in a very vivid way, you kind of know that you're in touch with something on the interior. Now, the further you go into that, the more jarring it gets, because you will encounter more direct forms of communication with that entity. And if you're not prepared, it will present to you as if you're losing your mind.
Okay. Would you say that the higher divine genius is in any way something that bridges us into contact with Christic gnosis, or is that a completely separate endeavor?
I would say that it's, that's a tough question for me to answer because it would force me to reveal my hand, show my cards.
Mm,
And
fair enough.
I put it this way. I'll put it this way. I would say that if we look at the Kabbalistic tree of life and we look at Tifereth, Tifereth is the representative of the Christ consciousness. It's not necessarily representative of the higher divine genius, but it's representative of what state that has to occur in.
Mm,
It's the place where the falling angel meets the rising ape,
mm,
so to speak. It's the place where the mundane persona and the personal, as we say, the higher divine genius is the god of your microcosm. um and that's the place where they meet and where they can have communication. But it is interesting, right? Because if we're talking about the ineffable, the absolute, that which we cannot say anything of in any possible way, that is a completely impersonal God. And it's very difficult to love an impersonal God. It's very difficult to believe in an impersonal God, or even if you do believe in it, like, why the fuck would I want to interact with it? It's just, that's like talking to the sky. Like, it's just this diffuse thing with. So the interesting thing is that in that space, in the medial space of the middle chamber there, where the initiate awaits further instruction, that is where you will have communion with the aspect of your spiritual architecture, which makes the impersonal personal. And truly, Christ did that. Right. Christ came in the form of a man because the impersonal God, that was the only way it could really make itself known, could reveal itself, its wishes, and what it considered to be capital G good, right, to man. So that's the way in which, we know what the absolute considers good, but still, right, it requires faith. It requires faith. And a lot of people, the thing about the capital G good that the Christ came to talk about, flew in the face of worldly wisdom, worldly knowledge. It was all about the same bullshit we prize and prioritize today: wealth, status, making a show of things, accumulating riches, securing yourself. Christ came and said, no, 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 no. I know that your culture was built around this, but really the fullness, the completion of the law is walk away from worldly wisdom. Do not choose riches, right? He didn't do that. He was offered everything in the analogy of his 40 days and nights in the desert, being tempted thrice by Satan. And he was offered the kingdoms and power of the earth if he just knelt. And ultimately he chose the cross. Hold on one second.
okay.
I don't know what's going on here. I don't know what's going on.
You hearing some echoes or something?
Loud, loud noises, and ambulances and trains,
Oh,
and gunshots and fireworks and dogs. I mean, I remember growing up
New
in this
York.
fucking. I'm telling you, dude, you don't get a second of fucking peace here. They're literally like landscaping crews are mowing people's lawns and trimming their hedges like full blast at 7 in the morning. Um, People race down this main road like all night. Somebody hit a fucking tree on the corner like 3 years ago. Kid was wasted, screaming at the cops. It's just chaos coming here. Meantime, it's so quiet where I live that you could literally hear an ant fart.
Yeah,
So,
I could not do that, man.
it's tough. It's
That'd
tough.
be rough. Uh, okay. Do you have any insight into the number of angels? Some say there's an angel for every human soul. Some say that it exceeds, maybe it's, who knows, infinite amount. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No.
No. Cool. Moving on. Angels versus intelligences versus spirits. Like we often see like maybe a planet corresponding to an angel, and then it has a separate intelligence, and then there's a spirit like Mercury, Raphael,
Yeah.
intelligence, yeah, Tri
Yeah, like you go down and
Tyrael.
the spirits, Taftartarat,
Mm.
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, how do we describe the
Sorat.
differentiations like in these
Again,
consciousnesses?
so they are, again, they are aspects of the intelligent energies which comprise the downward, for the sake of an analogy, the downward projection of the ontological chain. We would call these the spiritual hierarchies. And Agrippa talked a lot about them, and Iamblichus too. It's a major, major part of theurgy because it's the only way we know we can go up or travel outward is by using these chains to sort of pull ourselves upward. Um, you know, and we speak not literally lifting yourself out with your arms and hanging onto a chain, but just learning that, like, oh my God, all these things have these. I would call them like I would consider them like, if it helps to put it in more like, I don't know, technical, scientific, or up to date vernacular, you would kind of call them like frequency cascades. You would consider them the way that all things have different frequencies. I did an experiment of like this for last year's the sixth annual international or the Institute for the Institute for Hermetic Studies sixth annual conference. I gave a talk on this, and I made a homemade Chladni plate for anybody who's interested in cymatics.
Mm,
And essentially, what it is you play a certain note, and that note is connected to a very thin piece of metal, which then vibrates. Now, you could play any note, and the plate would vibrate and not create. Essentially, you put fine, fine sand or like fine, fine salt on top of the plate. And at a certain frequency, it will create beautiful symmetrical geometry. But you have to find that frequency. You can't just play any note. And that frequency is the resonant frequency of the plate, of the metal. So it's an expression of the interior geometry,
mm,
which of the particular piece of metal. And you have to first find the resonant frequency, and then you can go up by octaves. You can sort of tap into. It's like, if anybody understands music, you find the root note of a key. Okay, I'm okay. This, I thought my guitar's tuned to, C, but so that means this song's in G. So what'll happen is, I'll have to use, and then now I'm getting very technical, but you can use something like a capo to lay across all the strings, or a certain number of the strings on the fretboard of a guitar, to change the root note, to change the tuning you're in. So essentially what you want to do is you want to find the key, find the root note of the key. Oh, okay, I'm in C. I know what key I'm playing in. And it's the same thing with the resonant frequencies. Oh, okay. This thing responds to like 732 hertz. I'm going to do a multiple of that, and we're going to hit this thing at different points, of its resonant scale.
mm,
Different frequencies that have definite relationships to one another will create that beautiful geometric shape, because you're tapping into the resonant uh properties of the piece of metal. It's the same thing with the ontological hierarchies. You're
mm,
finding that different but corresponding note, that different but corresponding frequency, and you're using that. You can go high, you can go low, whatever it is you need to accomplish. But ultimately, they will present different kinds of geometry. And it's the same thing when interacting with different, it's not the same geometry. Even though you're finding different resonant notes or frequencies within the scale of frequencies of this plate, the geometry is not exactly the same, right? Because you're changing, you're either going up in vibration, the oscillations are getting faster, or going down, and the oscillations are getting longer and slower. Right, this kind of sine wave profile is the same thing in music, because music is
Mm.
vibration of air. Um, so they will present as different notes. They will give you different feelings when you hear the note. They will, and if you're talking about the Chladni plates and cymatics, it will manifest, it will or express a different kind of geometry. It's the same thing with the ontological hierarchies. When you find and interact with the different levels, they will have different personalities. They will have different ways in which they work. For
Mm.
instance, you want to do an invocation of a spirit. It's going to be too disorganized, too um wily on its own. It probably will hinder more than help a particular operation. So what you need to do is you need to make sure that the intelligence, which is the frequency above it, which governs it, is present first. And so in the Golden Dawn, we have this adage called it just goes invoke the highest first, which
Hmm.
is why you're taught all the divine names from the highest to the lowest. You start out with the Sephirotic divine name, you move to Archangel, you move to Angel, you move to the name of the mundane sphere, you move down to the intelligence, the spirit, and then finally you arrive at the whatever it is that's on your altar or in your ritual space, or connected to a particular talisman that's been made to be an emitter and a
Mm.
receiver, simultaneously emitting and receiving, which is why we use certain geometry, right? You always want to use the gram on a talisman. So there's different geometric figures, right? There's a pentagon, right? You know what the pentagon is.
Hmm.
So that's a figure that's angles are all on the inside. It doesn't have points, but you would use the gram, the pentagram, and it's that lineal figure. And at its center, you get the pentagon.
Mm.
That happens for every shape. You draw a heptagram, you get the gram and the gon. You draw a hexagram, you get the gram and the gon. So they are simultaneously projectors and receivers of that energy, which is how
Yeah,
how a talisman works.
that
So
makes sense. Yeah.
yeah, so that's essentially the way that these things express, the way that we interact with them through, the eye of the mind, is very much a part of the way that they'll use your available imagery to communicate with you. So not every expression of a gnome looks or an angel looks exactly the same to everyone. To be honest with you, it's been said, and from my own personal experiences, the purest form of an archangelic intelligence is geometry. The wings and all that other shit is very biblical. It's very poetic. But at the
Yeah.
end of the day, the thing that resembles them, I would say, most purely in terms of form, are different geometries.
Yeah, so that's really cool. That made me really grasp what you're saying. So it's like even maybe meditating on astral sigils or symbolism and holding that in your mind's eye, and then with vocalizing particular intonations. These are all like resonance codes for angels, intelligences, and spirits. And you can kind of stack those layers and really kind of like laser in on things
Yeah, but they have to relate, right? They all have to kind of hone in
of a
on one
harmony
message.
or something.
Right, exactly. They all have to be in the same scale, right? That's how harmony works. And then, um, not only that, but we're talking about doing astral stuff, and you need some sort of physical thing to ground it in Malkuth Visaya. The astral magic it can be potent, but it's never, I don't care who the fuck you are. I don't care what you've told me, what you've told other people or yourself. If you haven't anchored this intention in Malkuth of Visaya, it won't be as strong as it could be.
Hmm.
And you can do
So
that by gesture. You can do that by, it doesn't necessarily have to be this 2 hour long elaborate ritual, but something has to happen,
hmm. Is Metatron's cube, is that a legit geometry for Metatron, or is that just some like thing that people associate with it.
To be honest with you, I'm not even sure where originally it first appears. To be honest with you, I've not worked with that particular intelligence using geometry. Uh, you can use those things in terms of, talismans and things like that. I would say that, uh, but ultimately, in order to, I would say in order to get those things, there's a practice that we use. It's called the construction of yetziratic or telismatic images. And essentially what you're using is you're using the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, um, that comprise the name of the being, and you're kind of stacking them vertically. And that essentially creates a simulacra or a
Hmm.
simulacrum that you then work using all of the various methods that you've been kind of taught over the ensuing years or decades that you've been doing this. You use those methods and you kind of you do an invocation.
So it's interesting because when I think of the spiritual realm, I think of the opposite of the material. So I think of things like my senses in the material realm, and then I think in the spiritual realm, there's not that. But then things like scent or like incense and stuff seems like those attract angelic um entities and such. Like a lot of people talk about that all the time. So there's like
Mhm.
some kind of interface between the spiritual intelligences and material or like even sensual things like smelling or how does that the smell thing
Well, the
do
thing
they
is, the
like
thing is
smell
like,
things?
here's the thing. You can definitely smell things astrally. You would need, I think maybe, I don't really know, but I feel like it would probably work better if you have experienced, the material sense of smell. But at the end of the day, I mean, I've had dreams where I'm smelling baked cookies
Mm, yeah, yeah,
and it's fucking real and I'm
mm,
asleep and no one's cooking cookies, you know?
that's a
So,
good point. Yeah.
so there's that. But at the same time, there's also, we're talking about frequency and vibration and the things that those give off, are those are more, they have consequence and they have effect in those planes. And also, you know, one of the reasons why I like the GD stuff is because it gives a more thorough rationale, a more understandable, a more cognizable theory to these things. So the Golden Dawn would say this: by using a particular incense, you are working on the mind through the senses.
Mm.
And we have certain incenses that have, let's say, a Venusian property to them, like rose incense, something like that. They have inherent, attributions, but they also have implied or learned attributions, associations. But either way, all of these things in the beautiful, symphony of synthemata that theurgy requires, um, they have a way of elevating the state of mind to fixation or isolation of a particular element, um, within the psyche that corresponds to macrocosmic essences, such as the Venusian. And in that way, you begin to um, express that more purely and more abundantly in your own sphere of sensation, which then draws forth the corresponding macrocosmic force. So it's like if you reach up, they reach down.
Mm.
That's the way that the HOGD would really talks about these things and theorizes about these things, and that makes more sense to me than, even though I love him and I consider him somewhat of a friend, but when Skinner talks about how certain, spirits enjoy certain smells, I'm not 100% certain. I'm not saying I doubt it entirely, but I'm just not 100% certain. It's just that those types of practitioners have chosen to fully embrace that kind of experience of those, those beings. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, this is definitely an exteriorized entity that has its own personality and its own wants and its own desires. And I think that you need to mitigate that with this other, the all the other ideas that I've talked about that have been taught to me through the system that I've worked in all the episodes that we've done. It's
Yeah.
I find that it's not the most fruitful thing for theurgically to sort of give these things this fully anthropomorphized existence. It's partly that because that's the way they present to us. But at the end of the day, that's not what and who they are. And that's really the folly that goetic practitioners fall into. They believe what they see. They believe what they hear. And um there's no vetting, uh, theoretical vetting. It's all just what can I make happen? Who can I talk to? Who can I make appear? What can I get them to do? And there's less of this desire to know like what the fuck actually is this thing?
Yeah.
What am I working with? It's much more of that, hey, if it works, use it. Some of that is really good. And at least they're practitioners. At least they're in there getting it done and working with it. I respect that. I respect the shit out of that. In fact, I actually prefer that over the more scholarly, like detached. It's all very interesting, but we don't believe in any of it. I
Yeah.
think that's even worse bullshit. But at the end of the day, I don't think that's the safest or the most. I would say in the big picture, I don't think that's the most productive use of my time and energy.
So aside from working with these things in particular ways for whatever purposes to gain like specific intentional resonances using the, you know, angels, planets, all this stuff. Aside from that, is it eventually advantageous for us to try and attempt to mitigate, to liberate ourselves from things like planetary forces or the cosmocrators?
Yeah. Oh, there you go. You're learning the vernacular.
Yeah, I got that from you. Thank you. Expanding my vocabulary.
Yeah. I That's the goal of theurgy, really. And we can really see it if you really want to look at it and look at the mythopoesis surrounding this cultural phenomenon, this emergence of the theurgic um initiatic really impulse and impetus. You look at it on the ancient, I would say maybe the pre-Socratic era, the Homeric era. There was a lot of esotericism in there, but a lot of it was in deference to the gods, the blind forces of material creation, the larger than life essences that they chose to anthropomorphize and truly begin to interact with those intelligences in meaningful and productive and demonstrable ways. But and so you see a lot of subservience, a lot of worship and tribute to the gods. And ultimately it was like, hey, if Demeter wants you to fucking drown, or Poseidon wants you to swallow you up in a typhoon, you're shit out of fucking luck. We're just small potatoes down here. And then eventually you see the cultus of the hero displace, that um somewhat fatalistic priestly worship. And because they believe they were bound to fate, they had better just play the hand they got as best as possible. Whereas the cult of the hero and the Theer were just like, oh, exiting the game for a period of time, to get some space. And you see it in the cult of the hero expressing that, the 12 labors of Hercules, the 12 tasks of Odysseus, or ordeals of Odysseus. You see it in Theseus and the Minotaur and his work in the labyrinth. And it becomes the cult of the hero that eventually becomes divinized, right? They become demigods. They're part human, yeah, but they're also part divine. It's the same thing with the Christ, right? Fully man and fully God. And again, he had 12 apostles. So it's partly this solar analogy that's asking us to traverse traverse fate, and in traversing it, transcend it, right? Because the sun moves through the ecliptic. It moves by way of the ecliptic through the 12 signs of the zodiac, and it's not bound to any of them. And that's one of the reasons I think why the circumpunct is the perfect, really the perfect symbol for um for the planetary luminary of the sun. It's the point within the circle. It's the center. It's the still hub in the center of the revolving wheel, um, giving note to the rooted presence of the infinite amidst the whirlwind of the material forces. And that's essentially the symbol of the hero, particularly in the ancient mythologies.
Yeah. So is that what the ritual of the hexagram has to do with, like transcending these forces in
Well,
some way?
it has more to do with the calling forth and balancing of those energies first in your microcosmic sphere of sensation. If you recall to just a few moments ago when I said, yeah, ultimately we have to transcend it, but you don't just fucking shoot yourself out of a cannon. You have to first you have to reorganize the constituent psychic properties of the self in
That's,
accordance with the equilibrium of the more divinized blueprint of the macrocosm.
yeah,
So
that's
you
what I was gonna
start there.
ask. I was gonna ask if there's like if it's disadvantageous to do something like that ahead of time or too soon without doing other stuff prior or
Yeah, absolutely. You got to
yeah.
work on the elemental self first before you get into the celestial.
Okay.
But you essentially you work with the planets, and I guess colloquially we might say you got to get yourself right with this planet. This person has Saturnian issues, this person has Martial issues, this person has Venusian issues. Get yourself right with Venus, um, and a lot of that has to do with basing where your inconsistencies and weaknesses and strengths are based on your natal chart. Take a really good look at that schematic of fate and character, and then you attack things like the planetary hexagram rituals and consecration of talismans, working with those energies until the weak are strengthened and the strong are purified.
Mhm.
Then you move on. Then you begin to embody the solar archetype, the archetype of the sun, and that eventually leads you into Tifereth.
I read this notaricon for the acronym INRI that said uh, Igne Natura Renovator Integra, or
Integra.
nature by fire is renewed in its integrity. I was wondering if you could unpack and describe what that means.
Well, means quite a bit. Because again, there's certain levels of interpretation. What's really interesting to me is correlating that, right? Because you've got an alchemical axiom essentially there, right? Because that's the first operation is the blackening, which is, suffering something unto, carbonation, or carbonizing by fire. So which is essentially renewing the prima materia by first burning it. But also there's a Christian element, right? Because that was supposed to have been written above Christ's head on the cross, INRI. And obviously they say, it meant Jesus Nazarenus Rex Judeorum, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And then there are all these esoteric, mostly Rosicrucian reinterpretations of that acronym or notaricon. And what's really interesting is that, John the Baptist basically says, I baptize you with water, but one will come after me who will baptize with fire and the Holy
Mm.
Spirit. And so that's the initiatic component is the fire. And the interesting thing is that when you look at it, of the material elements, the Empedoclean elements, the most suitable vehicle for spirit in the material is fire. So in other words, there's something very, very, there's an affinity that the fifth element, the quintessence, has with fire. Um, and it's ultimately that the spirit that renovates, but its vehicle in the material is terrestrial fire. There are also three forms of fire. It's not just one fire. So it depends on what fire we're referring to in an esoteric discussion.
Yeah. It's like we're in a giant spagyric operation. Like the Earth is like a giant flask, and we're
Mhm.
undergoing all these alchemical processes of distillation and calcination and purification over thousands of years, kind of
Yeah.
like separating the pure from the unpure. And I don't know, yeah, it kind of reminds me of that, like exposing the flask to heat and, the souls to rise up over the distillation head, like liberating itself from its bonds. Um, it's kind of like reminds me of like the theurgic ascent. Yeah, so I don't know. It's just really
Exactly what it is.
interesting.
It's
Yeah.
exactly what it is. Zosimus of Panopolis in the 2nd century or 3rd century would have said the same thing. And in fact, he did say the same thing. Really, it's from him that we get this idea of alchemy, not only as material science, but as a spiritual science. Because again, him alluding to in the vernacular of his day, the holographic and fractal principles that are found everywhere. It's working with the blueprint of creation. And that's all we can go by, right? That's why we throw the word good out the window sometimes.
Hmm.
Because we're just working with the blueprint to see what happens. And it appears that we're working with nature in a way that is transcendent of it. And that will bring us to gnosis, that'll be the next phase where we kind of understand where do we go? What should we be doing? But I mean, all this stuff, the stuff that's really widely available, it's all the beginning.
Hmm.
It's not there's nothing you can read that speaks of the intermediate phases. I would say the closest thing you get to that is the Gnostic diagrams and the Gnostic sort of like quasi Merkaba sort of stuff. I mean, that's the only stuff that we have on the extant historical record that gives us some kind of intermediate uh glimpse, a glimpse at the intermediary or the intermediate phases of this kind of work. All the other stuff is really very, very entry level, even though it seems extremely esoteric and advanced to most people nowadays. And it's because a lot of people don't go through the actual experience personally to know, like, oh my God, that was just the doormat. Hello,
Yeah.
wipe your feet.
Do you think that the trajectory of like Earth and humanity, is it like as these cycles continue, these alchemical cycles that are working in the grand scheme of things, if we look at it like that model, if these souls are rising up and ascending over time, eventually the Earth will be left with like a really um the residue of the leftover matter.
No,
No.
no. So that's not my belief because one of essentially I'm not sure that it began this way. But again, just because it didn't begin that way doesn't mean we've deviated from its purposes, right? Because I'm not shitting in a diaper and drooling all over myself the way I began,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean something's wrong, you know? So,
Yeah.
things are meant to evolve. So I say that as a preface to my next statement, which is that the telos of the Golden Dawn is something called the tikkun ha'olam, which comes straight out of Lurianic Kabbalah, which means that and this is actually it goes back to Neoplatonic philosophy when they said highly, right? Highly matter. A lot of people say hule, but fuck them. I hate the anglicized pronunciation of Greek words. I don't believe they know what the fuck they're, and even if they do know what they're talking about, I want to, I'm a native Greek speaker. I don't want to hear that bullshit. He, Hele, okay? Hele,
Ile.
highly,
Yeah.
okay? Much better, much better. Highly matter was conceived to be inert, dead, subject to death, had no life of its own. Psyche, soul, could inhabit matter. But what ultimately vivified it and gave it life, meaning what causes this tree or rock to take form, the form that it's in. If it's just matter, it can't do it on its own. If it's just dead, inert matter, it can't possibly take this shape and have these properties. This was the thought back then. So they said pneuma, spirit, is what indwells this stuff and is able to render it animate or at least sensible, having some kind of form. And Kabbalistically, we would refer to that as the Shekinah, the divine presence, or the divine sparks trapped in all material reality. And the idea is that it's not enough for the person to kind of go on this solo selfish journey of spiritual ascent, because again, we're talking earlier, if we're all fragments of one consciousness, then no one goes unless we all go, unless everything goes. And the myth, the symbolic narrative that Isaac Luria, the Ari, that he uses to refer to this is talking about in the first failed creation, the klipot, their shells, their fragments of the first creation that have trapped the Shekinah, the divine, within them. So the proper theurgist, the proper adept, the proper, Kabbalist understands that you have to rescue those divine sparks so that they can go back to God. And that process involves the divination, the divinization, the spiritualization of matter, which cannot happen until you become an adept.
All right, I've got one more question.
Yep.
You've said many times as you enter through portal in Tifereth, the end of your world will come. I was wondering if you could like elaborate any more on that.
Technically, no, I
Okay.
can't. But I will say a few words. I love it. I think of the Silver Surfer. You remember? I think Lawrence Fishburne did the
Oh
voice
yeah.
for the Silver, and he goes, "All that you know is at an end," and that's kind of it. That's kind of the what happens when you leave the portal and go into when you pass through the veil of Paraket into the Holy of Holies of Tifereth, there to seek communion with the part of God that can speak to you. And the initiatic trajectory is much like the path of the ephod, the high priest in the tabernacle or the temple of Solomon, making his way once a year on Yom Kippur, right? Which was what? Kippur meaning the day of atonement, at one-ment, Kipporet.
Oh yeah.
That's just a rearrangement of the Hebrew words that spell paraket,
Wow.
right? Right? Pei, kaf, resh, and tav. You're right. You have paraket, but you rearrange the letters slightly, and it's kipporet. At one, you have veil, and then at one-ment, becoming one. Uh, so that path that the ephod takes, the high priest on Yom Kippur to the Holy of Holies, which first offering, burnt animal sacrifice on the altar, and then moving forward to the laver of purification there to wash himself, then making prayer and giving incense, ascending into the air like prayer, and passing through the temple furniture, the table of showbread, the 12 loaves, and then the 7-branch candlestick in the southern side of the hall. And then eventually, humbling himself, kneeling, and then going into the Holy of Holies to have communion with his Creator. That is the initiatic path. And the several stages of that are the relinquishment of the self. It's a very, very intimate and process, and it's very transformative in a way where by the time when you begin at that outer gate in preparation and you've cut that animal's throat and then you set it on the pyre, by the time you're getting up off your knees at the altar of incense, you are a different person. You are the prepared high priest. And that is a completely different state of being. And so in that sense, the person at the gate, he's dead. Now he may come back into the picture, but he's not in the fucking driver's seat anymore. And so that is a death, you know. And then right there's that saying, if you die before you die, then when you do die, you won't die.
Yeah.
So that's the initiatic process. That's really all I'm at liberty to say about that.
That was
Although
generous
if you listen to virtually every other conversation you and I have had, you can put it together.
for the pieces. Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to speak on or throw out there before we close out?
Buy my book.
Buy your book, buy his book, buy 12 of them. I'm going to.
Buy 12, get one free.
Deal. I can't wait,
Thanks,
man.
Sky. Thanks,
Yeah.
man. I love talking with you again.
You too, brother. All right. Well, hope you all enjoyed that, and we'll see you on the next one. And thank you.